Good evening. Welcome back to FAU Against CO2. My name is Corinna Knauer, and I have the honor to introduce our guest for tonight, Dr. Heidrun Moschitz. Welcome. She is from FIBEL, the Research Institute of Organic Agriculture in Switzerland, where she's working in the Department of Socio-Economic Sciences and as the group lead of Society and Innovation. Dr. Moschitz studied agricultural sciences at the Technical University of Munich and got her PhD from the ETH in Zürich on the topic of policy networks of the organic sector in Europe. She has published several papers and works on urban-rural relations. Her lecture today will be on the topic of what's the role of cities in sustainable food systems. So thank you very much for being here with us tonight. And I think we're all very excited about your lecture.
Yeah, thank you, Corinna, for this nice introduction. Hello, good evening to all of you out there. I can see you're quite widely spread across different disciplines, which suits perfectly to the subject I'm going to talk about, which also is a lot about different disciplines as we will soon see. So let me share my presentation with you and then let's go. So yeah, I'll be talking about your and my food this evening. I hope you're not too hungry because it'll take some minutes before I'm through, but you can of course just have your snack while you're listening. But what I would like you to do first to get us into the mood of what I'm talking about is think about the food you had today. What did you have for lunch? What are you eating right now? What do you know about that food? I mean, first of all, I hope it tastes well. But do you know where it comes from? Does it come from the supermarket? Or did you just buy it from the farmer next door? And how was it produced? And if you say it's local, do you know where the inputs came from? So when I usually ask this question to students in a class, it turns out that most of them go to the Mensa or somewhere take away for lunch and just grab the food, take the food that's there. And that's what I'm doing as well if I don't have a lot of time. So I think it's very interesting to reflect a little bit on the topic of food, which is so personal and individual. We all have different tastes, and it's also very, how to say, it's very personal what the preference of food is, but we really, we're here where we live. I think we're in the lucky situation that we get to eat food regularly 3 times a day or more. But we hardly ever really think about where it comes from and what it means. So this is what I want to do with you for the next 45 minutes, to just stop a little while and give you some thoughts about food. Of course, it's a huge topic we could talk and discuss for ages about this. So the menu for this evening is a little bit about food and sustainability. And then I will focus on the role of cities. I will zoom into 2 topics which I have been working on. And that's topic also of local food, which I think is something that you quickly get to when you just start discussing about food. And the second is then, what can cities really do? What are their spaces for action? What do they do? So as you might already know or not, but food and agriculture, they contribute a whole lot to CO2 emissions, to climate change, and so on. So here we have some data from the IPCC telling us that's about quarter of all the impact of greenhouse gas emissions comes from agriculture, forestry, and land use. So here, maybe food processing is not considered, but it's a huge share. It's almost the share as electricity in heat production is. So it's not just talking about fancy stuff here, but it's really important and has an impact. And there's more to environmental impact than climate or like greenhouse gases, of course. So there was a study in Switzerland where they also calculated the impact on biodiversity or biodiversity loss, etc., other things. And there we have an impact of 28% of food. And you can see here the symbol chosen in this figure is meat, because of course meat and all animal products, they are really those who are the main drivers behind this huge impact, because an animal is a very, very inefficient way of using feedstuff like wheat and grains and maize. It would be much better if we would consume this directly. Huge energy losses, but you will know that already, of course. So this is just to kind of frame quickly the importance of food in this overall topic of sustainability. And yeah, you can go deeper into that in some, if you read some papers, but my intention is a bit to widen and to think more broadly about food here. So that's why I also think it's interesting that you apparently come from very different disciplines. And I think that's exactly what food is. Food is so much related to so different fields, topics in our life. It is for some, it's some focus really on the health aspect of food, but that's one and not so unimportant aspect of food, of course. But it has a lot to do with the quality of life. I was talking about tastes and cultural preferences and so on. So also the question, do you grab a takeaway and eat it while walking? Or do you sit down with a couple of friends or your family and have a conversation? So these are all things that are related to food and how we consume food. And of course, it has an impact on the environment. It's a question of social inclusion, who eats what and who's included in food production, who's maybe, how do you say, who's working in which working conditions, so to say, all involved in food production. I mean, we had those issues on slaughterhouses in Germany, but you can see them on tomato fields in Italy and everywhere. It's a matter of land use. It's also a lot about economy, of course, and it has to be because we have a food economy here. And if we talk about food and healthy food and sustainable food, quickly people also start to talk about education. So we see that food is really everything. And that's what makes it so interesting for me. And you can discuss about food with so many different people and everybody will have a different perspective on it. And that, on the other hand, it's nice, but it's also hugely complicated. So, because it touches on so many themes and topics. And then, in addition to those topics, if I talk about food, I think about a food system. What I mean by that is to look at the whole cycle of how food is produced, where it's processed, how it's traded, distributed, consumed, where we buy it, how we prepare it, consume it, and the question of what to do with waste and all the food waste that is occurring during the cycle, or if it's a cycle. So we have different themes, and we have then these different processes, because, and then on top of this, we have different actors who are involved in the different processes. So if we go here to the market, you can see a farmer is a market player, a retailer, processor. These are all market players, and they will discuss, or hopefully they can discuss, how the food is produced and further sold and so on. But then we have us, I would say, as consumers, to make some decisions on which food we buy. We also act as citizens. So this is then related more to our voting behavior. Do we vote for, in Germany you vote for parties, so you might look at the program of the party, and if they what they say about food, or the framework conditions that are related to food. In Switzerland, there are popular votes, so it's the direct democracy, and just recently, I think, last weekend actually, we had 2 votes on pesticides, and the question of whether the pesticides should be banned completely or not, and drinking water. And these were hugely emotionally discussed. I don't know if you followed that. They failed, as most initiatives, by the way, do, but it triggered a whole lot of discussion also with the other actors. So this is also where you have an impact in the food system as a citizen. And finally, we have here what I call policy and administration. So if you think about all the policies that intervene with food, a lot of that is, of course, agricultural policy. I'll get to that in a minute. But we have regulations on quality standards, etc., etc. So they provide the framework conditions. So you see, it really gets usually complex if you think about changes in this food system. But it also has, on the positive side, many ways where you can start changing things. However, when we think about this food system, when I was starting to look into that topic more closely, I came across this figure. It's about Switzerland. It shows the share of the agricultural population compared to non-agricultural population. You see this yellow bar going down steadily since the start of industrialization. And that will be the same in all industrialized countries. So the proportion now of agricultural population is around 2% maybe in Switzerland. I guess it will be the same more or less across Europe. And I was really startled by the thinking of, we have such a complex system of food, and so many things intervene with it, and yet the only place where you can really see there's some policy about food is the agricultural policy. Other policies, they work really more hidden way maybe, but agricultural policy is really so prominent. But I was really thinking, how can it be that these 2% of our population should solve all the issues we have with food and around food? That can't be. At the same time, with 3/4 of the population living in urban areas. So this is where the consumers are. This is where the choices are made. And this, for me, is really the idea of why I think cities should deal with food and not all leave it to agriculture, which might take place in rural areas. So, and actually cities do. I don't know how many of you have been to the World Expo in Milano in 2015. It was all about food. and it was called Food Energy for Life, I think was the overall motto. And the mayor of the city of Milano, he wanted to, I think he wanted to kind of have a legacy somehow, be remembered as somebody really, really starting off a new thing. So what he called into place was the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. This was written by kind of not quite ghostwriters, but almost. They were researchers and people from urban food practice, which a couple of them I got to know, and I know so they really had put a lot of effort in formulating a good policy pact there. And at the end of the Expo in Milano, the mayor had 100 signatory cities. And cities still sign on this urban food policy pact. So it's more than 200 right now. I think in Germany, you have Cologne, for example, who signed it. So here it's really a global agreement that cities should do something about sustainable food. And then you have other networks which you might know because Erlangen is part of them. For example, the Biostätte-Netzwerk in Germany, I think that was really initiated, if I'm informed well, it was probably initiated by Nuremberg, but several other cities joined. And then you have the Organic Cities Network, which is much driven by Italians, but also there you have like a network of cities saying, yes, we want to do something about it. So here you see cities have become active. And where do I see now what cities can actually do and why it might make sense to act as a city? Because I said to start with the limitations, still, even though I think agricultural policy shouldn't be the only place where food is dealt with, we must be clear that a lot of money goes into agricultural policy. And this is something that's regulated or policy works at a Länder level or at a national level or at a European level and not at a city level. I don't really know if there's really a city having its own agricultural policy. So, and because there's huge influence, okay, that's a limit to cities. But on the opportunity sides, I think the advantage of dealing with the policy at a city level is that sorry, I'm getting a chat message. Okay, this was not for me. So I see the advantage that at a city level, the ways are much shorter. Usually people know much more who's working in another department in another policy field. So they can more easily connect with each other. And as I showed before, I mean, as food is spread across so many topics, it's important to talk with each other. The second point is that cities, and they do, you can see that they have this hinterland where they can connect with. So a city often identifies also with its hinterland as a city region. And I know there have been these policies of cities. I know the example of Hamburg, for example, where the city had farms that belonged to the city at one point, and now they were rented out or privatized. But they said, yeah, if we privatize them, the new farmer has to convert to organic. So that's a policy a city can do, and there's this connection to region around the city, and to work on this local field or local space. I think this is also something that is easier for a city than at a national level, where's the hinterland of a country, and that's just not the perspective there. And the third point is the relationship, which you might have also seen a lot, experienced yourself, and at a city level you have a lot of enthusiastic people initiatives, community initiatives, and really do something and drive something. And I think they can connect a bit easier to the city administration than they can do at the national level. So these are 3 points where I see there's opportunities for cities to really deal with food. If we go a bit more closer to city administration, what is more in concrete terms, what can a city do? So when I say city, I don't mean the city as in terms of the city population, but I mean now usually the administration of the city. I already mentioned a few things, but you can broadly differentiate between two worlds of city. City can be an enabler for providing space for communities, community gardens, for example, as here in the picture shown, or they can provide spaces where NGOs can create exhibitions or can start growing their own food, or can green the neighborhood with tomato plants, etc., etc. Or another way of enabling is to engage in or support so-called food policy councils. In German, it's the Ernährungsräte, which are spreading all over Germany, all over Europe. The first ones were in North America, United States and Canada back in the 90s already, I think. So as many things, slowly it came to Europe, first to the UK, and now you can see them all over Europe. So these are usually councils. They're different from city to city. They're usually a meeting point of very different actors, very different interests. So again, you have the communities there, but you also have market players there, and sometimes the city admin is directly involved. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's in opposition to city administration. But cities can provide spaces for this as well. Then, on the other hand, the city can also really be active in food and shaping food. So in one way they can do that is by developing a food strategy, for example, where they really develop their goals for what they want to reach in terms of food to increase sustainability. I know that Zurich has a food strategy, for example, where they say we want to reduce food waste, we want to educate kids again about food, and so on and so on. So this is a strategic paper which can trigger also a lot of other actions because people then refer to the strategy. And finally, cities, they have canteens themselves. They're really actors in the food market also. So I'm talking about school canteens, hospitals, old people's homes, etc. In all those places, food is consumed, and this is a huge sector where a lot of food is sold. And if you change something there, you might be able to change to really generate an impact. And what I find very intriguing about this in terms of increasing the sustainability impact is that if you have an old people's home and the chef there decides, okay, we'll source more sustainable food, let's say we'll source organic food, then they will source it, and then you don't have to convince every person living in that home. It's just the chef you're dealing with. So instead of having to convince, I don't know, 500 people, it's only one person. So I think here is the power of public procurement and food. And I think the next yeah, in the next minutes, I want to talk a bit more about this vision, what cities do. It's being an actor in the food market. But for that, I would like you to first give me an impression. What would you say? What is sustainable public food procurement for you? For that, I'll share another screen, which is the Mentimeter. So you should find the code also in the chat. What I would like, yeah, let's take a few minutes and go to menti.com, use your smartphone or your laptop, type in the code you see there on the screen, and just a few thoughts about what is for you sustainable food. So what is it that makes your potatoes sustainable? Or is every potato sustainable? Okay, thank you. Yeah, you can still continue voting. I find it interesting to see also something I didn't intend with this question, but it's very interesting, the different interpretations of food, I think. So people started really with naming concrete food like apples and potatoes, which is absolutely correct to think about that and say, yeah, this is the food I'm eating. And then others more focus on what, how it's produced maybe, but also what we are consuming, like the vegan term, and then it's healthy. So yeah, that's also something. It's a side note from my side, which I always find interesting. We try to translate food in German, and you only have the chance to use one word for that. I think that's almost impossible. So food in English it's very encompassing, where in German we use Lebensmittel, we use Nahrung, we use Ernährung, depending on the context. Okay, but I think we'll stop here. Thank you for that. So we see you have different focuses. Some say, okay, it's really about short transport, and I think that relates a lot to the energy question. We have some social aspects, fair labor, and then I think, yeah, then organic waste or also, or food waste wasn't mentioned so much, but it might be somewhere in there. And what we have a lot, and thank you for that, it was a bit, because otherwise my presentation wouldn't work now. Many of you said it needs to be regional and local and seasonal. Of course, the organic is also there, but I'll pick the regional bit of that. I think, yeah, it is important, and I want to talk about local and regional food now in the next couple of minutes. Just changing again my screen. So if you hadn't voted for, I dare to ask you, just thinking that probably there would be several of you voting for local or regional food, and thanks a lot. Otherwise, I would have need to improvise now. So let me talk a little bit about regional and local food. So first of all, I could do another Mentimeter asking what is local for you. And I've done that before, and the responses are quite different. Some say it's 20 kilometers radius, others say it's my hometown or my home country. So if you think for yourself, a spontaneous response, what would that be? And we can group this maybe into 4 broad categories of definitions of region. So first of all, it can be a geographic space. In this example, it's districts around the city of Munich, and they have their little label for their district, and this is sold as local in the city of Munich. But region, you will also all have probably some cultural attachment to a certain region. I found this poster in an organic supermarket in Freiburg in Breisgau, I think. And the shop owner told me, well, yeah, for me also food from Alsace is local, because they also schwätz there. So it was really related to this particular dialect they have in the region. So it didn't bother about the border in between the countries. Then local, often you might know this label, geprüfte Qualität, Bayern, and that's a definition that often retailers use. They say, I have to be able to source the local food I want to sell in my region, in this region. So it can't be too small, because my connections to my suppliers are wider. And then they have a bit wider definition of what is local. So in this case, it's the whole Bundesland of Bayern. And then there's another aspect of local or regional that's more touching upon the possibilities that you interact with people, that get to know them on the markets. So this is all quite complex, what local is. So if you ever work on local or regional food, be sure that you clarify what you mean by that, and that you clarify with those who you're talking about also, because it's by far a defined term. And another thing, we saw it in the Mentimeter. Some also said, yeah, it has to be regional, but others said it has to be seasonal as well. Imagine, I mean, you could have very local greenhouse producing nice tomatoes in the middle of the winter with a lot of energy input. So it would be score 100% on their scale of locality, but it might not be what you would have in mind spontaneously thinking about local. However, the thing with local is it doesn't say anything about the quality really. I once talked to a farmer and he was so proud selling his local sausage to me. And then I asked, well, so where do you, he said, yeah, it's only five food miles or 0 food miles or something. And I asked, yeah, but then you grow your own food. Oh, no, I'll buy it. It's soya. I said, well, what's the local bit in that sausage then? So it's really careful for me. Local and sustainable are not equal. And it's a bit difficult sometimes to state where do we cut off, where do the seeds, inputs, and so on come from. However, people are a lot interested in local food, and I think it's there's good reasons why, and I'll get to that at the end of my presentation. So here I just want to show another thing that's a bit provocative for the local foodies, if you want to call them like that. This is out of a master's thesis about 10 years old, where somebody looked into, okay, if the city of Basel, so that's where I live, wants to feed itself completely as local as possible, and we ignore that there's France here, and so France is just here and Germany is here, and actually they are both very important for vegetable supply in the city, but we ignore that because of statistics. Where does the food need to be produced? And well, as you can see, it's about a radius of maybe 60 kilometers or a bit more that food needs to be sourced. But that means that all people living in that area couldn't source local food. So in other words, a city like Basel with an agglomeration of 500,000 is far too big to be really supplied only by the region. So there's limitations to that as well. Yet, as I said, cities are increasingly interested in local food. And we had the chance to do a study for the city of Freiburg, who wanted to know how much of the food we eat here in the city actually is local. So we were like saying, okay, we probably won't be able to tell you exactly, but we can try. That's what we did. And we started off by defining what do you mean by local. We did that with the person who was well, the spokesperson for the city of Freiburg. Sorry, that's quick. So in the end, and there was a scientific group, group to accompany the whole project, and we had stakeholders invited. So in the end, they defined the Regierungsbezirk Freiburg as their border for the region, which is about a quarter of the whole Bundesland, Baden-Württemberg, so you can imagine a little bit. And well, we worked with statistics, we worked with the consumer statistics and agricultural statistics, and did some interviews with people who were processing the food, who were bringing the food really into the city. So I'll just jump forward to show you the end results, and we did a lot of assessments as well, I must say. So what you can see here is actually the light blue bars show the consumption of that product in the city of Freiburg. And you can compare that with the dark or the green bar, which shows how much of that consumption is local food. And what you see in the yellow bar is what is actually produced in the region that the city of Freiburg could potentially consume. So here we didn't do it the same as in the Basel study I showed you, but we said, okay, let's assume that the whole region would like to consume locally. So we just gave a share, I think it was 10% of the production to the city of Freiburg, because that was the share of the population of the whole region. So you could see that, for example, beef, there's a high share that beef is consumed from the region. Also milk, of course, it's the Schwarzwald, so there is a lot of milk there. So people do consume, and there's more importantly, there's milk produced there. There's also a dairy networks there, which is much more important than whether they are cows or not. Processor. But you have also products like pork, only 7% regional, or fruit, where I must say that's maybe it should be 16%, because if you deduct those fruits that can't be produced in the region, which would be citrus and so on. But still, you can see there's differences between different products. And then we were really curious to know about how do those local regional products come to the city. And here again, just a few examples. What I would like to draw your attention to is that if you're ever interested in finding this out, be aware that it's different. You can't say, oh, a way to sort of get more local food into the city is by farmers markets. It is if you look into vegetables and fruit, but it's not if you are interested in dairy, milk products, or meat. With meat, the local butchers are much more important. Or also all restaurants and gastronomy. That was also very interesting for us. And since we did the study in Freiburg, I think it was back in 2015 or so, 15, 16, we did a couple of more of those studies for Leutkirch and Waldkirch, also in Baden-Württemberg. And I would like to share some of the conclusions we drew from that. I just showed you that there's, depending on the product, it's different sales channels or different actors who are relevant for that. We saw that even more clearly when we compared Waldkirch and Leutkirch with each other, two small cities. And there we really found that in one city, the restaurants were very important, while in the other city, the smaller food shops were very important for the meat, for example. So it's there's really differences in that. And again, what I said with the dairy, but we could also see, for example, Leutkirch is in the middle of the Allgäu, which you will know as one of the milk producing regions in Germany. However, the dairy that is there, or the dairies that are so huge that they don't differentiate where the milk comes from. So if you buy a bottle of milk in that town, you just know it probably comes from that dairy, but you don't know where the milk comes from, and that those dairies sourced from a much larger region than the people found would be local. So you can't trace it. You don't know how much is local. And it's not because there's nothing local produced, but it's because the processors are not working at the scale that you need them to work for dealing with those quantities that are adaptive. So you need bit smaller units of processing to sell from locally. And yeah, maybe one last thing from those points you can see here is what we learned while searching for the data is really that the whole food system is often quite intransparent. You often don't get the figures you would like to get. You can't speak to the people you would like to speak to, or you can speak to them, but they just don't know because no one has ever asked the question where food comes from so far. So that's also a learning in itself. So I'm getting closer to the end of this input, and I'm looking forward to the discussion after. So what I was saying is that local food, in my view, is not really per se more sustainable, but I think it opens up these spaces for discussions. So you can ask, why is the share of regional food consumed so low compared to the food that is produced, or compared to the food that is consumed overall? So that would be this question here, and why? Where's this gap between the local production and the consumption? And if you couldn't produce so much, why is only so little consumed? So and by showing these figures, it's not necessarily because they're super accurate that you can directly deduct results, but you can really use them to start the discussion about much more important questions, which I have listed a few of those here. So who's consuming the food, and what do we want to produce in the region? If you remember, in Freiburg, they had only 7% of pork produced locally. The question now is, do they really want to increase their local pork production? And do they want to increase their local and pork consumption? Okay, so I think this is the real value of looking into these studies, using those figures as trigger for further discussion. And I feel that the potential of urban food policies really trying to get a picture as whole as it can be. You saw in all those figures that I showed you, it's a lot about the regional economy, but it's also quality of life, environment, and land use are very prominent there. So use the topic because it's so multifaceted. Use dialogue and negotiation in the local area and discuss what is the contribution to sustainable food systems. Where are the solutions, or which solutions are there? And yeah, I think there's space for taking really own decisions for a certain region, and that might be very different from Erlangen to Cologne or Berlin or Zurich, because people have different preferences. The market structure is different. The producers work different. Processes are different. But you can use that to make the decisions. Also, I think in an urban area, using really the creativity of all the startups that are there together with markets, players, and administration, and empower those who are living in the city, who are the citizens and want to create. So that's where I see the role of cities for food and sustainability, or sustainable food. And I just put you in some brief or some selected publications that we had in a couple last years. If you want to find out more what FIBL has been doing on the topic, you can go to this thematic site. Mention of caution, it's very hard to find it on our institute site, to be honest, so it's better if you use the link. And if you're really interested in the topic and you want to read more in English, I can just recommend this book, which is not brand new anymore, but still very intriguing to read. It's a book by an architect called Carolyn Steele, and Hungry City, How Food Shapes Our Life. She really explains you the whole history of food and cities in very nice words. Looking forward to the discussion now.
So Thank you very much, Dr. Moschitz, for your excellent presentation. I think we all learned a lot and got some new impulses to think about. And I would say we will start with the questions right away. I encourage everyone in the audience to write their questions or mark questions which are particularly interesting. So the first question is, in the supermarket, there are just labels of the country, but sometimes Italy might be less transport than northern Germany. Do you know if there exists a label which counts the traveling distance of the food?
No. A simple answer. No, I don't know such a label, I'm afraid. And this is exactly what I was saying. It is super complex, and I think we all know the situation being in the supermarket and doing kind of calculations of things. And indeed, yes, it's quite difficult to know. So labels in supermarkets, yeah, I guess they only give you a very basic idea. On the other hand, what is also true, and I didn't integrate that into my presentation, transport usually is really overestimated as impact as environmental impact of food. Usually, it's much more the way in which something is produced than the transport. So if we take summertime, so some vegetable, the transport really doesn't matter. You can transport it from south of it to north of Germany, and it's less. I would say it's less environmental impact than if it's organic compared to conventional vegetable produced in northern Germany, because there's so much gray energy in that conventional thing. Of course, it's different if you're not seasonal and so on, but yeah, basically transport is not the main impact of food in environmental terms.
Thank you for your answer. And the next question is, what are simple ways to motivate others to consume more sustainable food?
Well, I mean, that would be the topic of a whole workshop, I would say. I don't know if there are simple methods in that way. I mean, maybe at least I think you have to make the choices simple. The choices for sustainable food should be simple, and you shouldn't start the argument to calculate the CO2 emissions, including a life cycle assessment, like the transport question or so. You have to find ways that speak to people. And yeah, so what should I say? I mean, one thing is that you don't make people choose. Well, that sounds very strange in a democratic country, I think. But if you think about school canteens or so, and you have people, you can't choose where this food comes from. So you just you eat what you get there. So that's something where you make the chef choose the more sustainable. And other things are, I mean, there's a whole literature bunch on nudging, which means make the sustainable choice the simple choice. So place the products where people just walk into and have it on the eye level. There is a more sustainable product. You can also place apples at the cashier instead of the gummibärchen, and then you will have an increase in apple consumption probably, and so on. So you can make very prominent example maybe You all know canteens, mensas in university. You have Menu 1, Menu 2, and so on. If you make Menu 1 the vegetarian, the sustainable, or the vegan one, you will have more consumption of the sustainable. I don't know if that's simple.
Thank you very much. The next question is, what can local politics do, in your opinion, to get food more sustainable?
Yeah, I think I mean, the city, for example, I mean, they govern the school system. So, and they have their public canteens, depending on the size of the city. They will have public canteens themselves, or hospitals and so on. And there they can intervene, certainly, to make that more sustainable. Then you can have, if you think of festivals that run in cities, like in Munich, I know the Tollwood Festival, they decided years ago that there will only be organic products sold at the festival. So at each food stand, you can only get an organic burger. And that, of course, is a huge impact. Then if we go to the field of education, again, if you go to communication, I think cities can also work on that level in advertising and talking to people about sustainable choices in food. They can, and then that's maybe a little bit the easier things. Than more complicated things are if you start programs with your local farmers and try to. Many cities do have farms. They own farms and they rent it out. So the example of Hamburg, where they said, yeah, we privatize the farms, but they have to convert to organic. That's another way, which is maybe not so easy and depends a lot on different circumstances.
So the next question is there something like solidaric agriculture the solution?
Yes and no, maybe. I think solidaric agriculture is a great initiative to bring people back to think about their food and yes, consume more sustainable. So direct impact for those people who are a member of such a cooperative is great, but I say no because it's very limited. Usually those cooperatives have a small number of members, so the overall impact will just be a bit marginal, so to say. Just, well, I don't know, 100, 200, 300 members in a city of 1 million, then that doesn't really change the game, right? But another argument is that those initiatives are often quite visible and they're taken up in media. There will be articles about them. So on the other hand, they contribute maybe to the overall debate on food. So they make that more public. So that can be like an indirect impact. And maybe if we would think that a bit more large scale as having, again, I come with my city hospital, if they would be part of a cooperative, then the impact could also be a bit larger maybe. So I think it's yes and no, and it's strong and sensitizing people about food and educating. But I a bit doubt about the direct impact, but we shouldn't underestimate the soft impact, so to say.
Thank you very much. The next question is, Do you think it's possible to feed the world with completely organically or more broadly sustainable grown food?
Definitely, yes. There's been a publication on this of a colleague of mine, or colleagues, and together with others. I think it was in Nature Communication. So if you look for that, I can't say the name of the publication right now, but one of the authors is Müller, Adrian Müller, and Christian Schade. You can search that. They were calculating different models. So yes, I think it's definitely possible, but it's not possible without changing our consumption habits. The only scenarios where they could make it work is if we, or I don't know the exact things, but it's like reducing our intake of animal products by half, at least. Less meat, less dairy products, etc., etc. The whole issue of feed no food, so eat the wheat and not the beef, or eat the maize and not the beef, basically, these things. So yes, it's possible, but it's demanding, and it's not just what to say. It's not just asking agriculture to change, but really consumption.
So the next question is quite similar to your answer. It is, if you want to eat sustainable, is it really necessary to go vegetarian or even vegan?
Well, it's. I think going vegan is probably very, very consequent way if you look at consumption only. You certainly will have a much lower environmental impact, and yeah, you can show that with figures. There's no doubt about that. I mean, and it's probably, even if you consume then a lot of processed food, it's still probably less environmental impact. But what I like to do in these things is, of course, the world would need a lot of more vegans, so to say, to reduce consumption of animal products. But there's another perspective on looking where is food produced and how do we use the land we have. And living in Switzerland, we have loads of grassland, but you have that in Germany as well, depending where you live. And grassland can't just be converted into arable land, and you can't just grow wheat and other grains, cereals on grassland. It's not possible from climatic and topographic reasons. So my other view on this is, can we afford not to use the grass and for human consumption? And if the answer to that is no, we need to use it, because otherwise we're not using the land we have available in our region. Then we need animals who can do the job for us to digest the grass, because we just can't as humans. So I think from that perspective, I would say we need a couple of ruminants to do the job for us, but maybe not as intensive as they are as we're using it right now.
Thank you very much. The next question is, which potential do you see in sustainable food production within cities, not only the hinterland, for example, rooftop gardening?
I must be honest, I don't have figures on that. I know there have been calculations from some Italian colleague who said there's huge potential for that. And yeah, probably there is quite some. The interesting discussion you can have here is with the organic sector. And basically, I know that discussion from a case in Rotterdam, that if you do it on rooftop gardens, you have containers, and so the plant doesn't have a real connection to the soil anymore. So it's in some soil, but it's not connected to soil. So it can't be certified organic, although it might be really grown from the production way organically. So, but I wouldn't make that organic certificate a matter of is that sustainable or not, personally. That's more a discussion organic sector has to lead. So I can't tell you anything about the real potential, but I think there is more potential to it. An interesting other discussion is all this issue on vertical farming, which can take place perfectly in cities, on rooftops, or integrated in other buildings, or just as a building in itself. You can think of a really high-rise tower where you produce food. Currently, it's more for salads, I think, and in small greeneries you can produce them in hydroponic systems with LEDs, very energy efficient, and they never see sunlight or so, but they're perfectly local. And if you do a bit of recycling and good use of energy, it might be really sustainable if you do a LCA on that. But I don't have current up-to-date figures on this. But I think, yeah, there's some more potential than we're actually using, and it's probably necessary to use more of that in the future.
Thank you very much. The next question is, we did not talk about food waste. How big is the impact of saving food?
Yeah, good point. I mean, we know it's 30% of all food is wasted, and a lot of that is wasted by consumers. So it's not supermarkets where we have the highest share of food waste. That's really with us consumers. Yeah, so definitely the impact is very high. And just saw yesterday a presentation of a colleague who did your PhD on the topic about healthy and sustainable food and so on. And it's quite clear that yeah, we can really improve. And if we think of that, only that a third is just lost. A third of the food produced, I think, goes to animals. A third is lost, and a third is then there for our consumption. You don't have to know a lot of maths to just see that this is unsustainable. And there's certainly, yeah, I think it's a bit immoral to go on wasting food to that extent while we're talking about deterioration of lands and so on.
Thank you very much. The next question is sustainable food also really healthier?
Well, that depends on your definition of sustainability, I would say. Yeah, I mean, if you understand sustainable should be sustainable in many dimensions, in all dimensions, then of course, yeah, it has to be healthy. On the other hand, you can ask yourself: is organic crisps, are they sustainable really? Because they're probably not that healthy, but they have been produced, let's say, in a more sustainable way, the conventional crisps. Yeah, I think that might be a discussion for philosophers.
So the next question is, younger people are often more aware of sustainable food. How do we raise the awareness in the elder generation?
So was it elder people are less aware?
How do we raise the awareness in the elder generation, was it?
What do you mean by elder generation? Let's say 60 plus. I don't know. I don't have that experience. I would need to hear more about that. I mean, if I talk about the elder generation, I would talk about people who lived in the wartime. So for them, it's much more a question of having enough to eat. But I don't really see that the elder generation is less interested. I mean, if you think about the organic movement, the first organic movement, or the organic movement, started in the 1920s. Then there was a second wave in the 1940s, and then the maybe the bigger wave is 1970s, 80s. And so these people are now retiring, and they were quite active, and they were probably your age or a bit older. So I'm not sure if we can say that in general they're not interested in.
Thank you very much. There's also the question, food has a huge emotional component, and from history, meat is connected with welfare. How do we break up this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I recently read that in the Middle Ages, well, first of all, nowadays we have about 50 kilograms per capita meat consumption every year in Germany. Same in Switzerland, by the way. So it's 1 kilogram a week, more or less. I just recently read that in the medieval ages, people in the cities were the ones that could afford a little more. They were eating 100 kilograms per year. I'm not sure if that's totally true, but it seems like really that has been there already in other times. Yeah, but breaking with this idea. The funny thing is, it's not that old actually. I mean, I would say it's a phenomenon starting more or less in the 60s, when people started to be able to afford eating meat every day, but not just Sundays. I guess we probably need to have much better chefs for vegetarian dishes. And I'm still astonished how little vegetarian choices there often are in restaurants, for example. And so if you only get to eat the spaghetti with spinach and whatever every time you're in a restaurant, then you're not very excited about it. So I guess probably it's a bit more that way. I mean, you have chefs in TV that do have an impact. Savina or Jamie Oliver, they do try to cook more sustainable, I think, in some ways. So yeah, but it's a difficult one.
The next question is, do you know the label eternity? Is it helpful in your opinion?
Sorry, I connect something different to eternity. I think that's so I don't really know the label, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is, isn't the grassland argument a bit short, as the major part of animal products is produced in farms without grassland, and all those animals eat vegetables or soy that could have been eaten directly to feed the world?
Yeah, maybe I wasn't clear. I mean, they eat maize, soy, cereals, so they don't really get to eat vegetables, I think, by the way. But no, I absolutely agree. I mean, I wasn't talking about yes, go and eat meat as you do right now. I was just saying that in a world where we would all be vegans, we would miss out potential land we could use to feed ourselves. So the argument would rather be stop producing or reduce pork and poultry production very largely and reduce beef production or limit beef production and sheep and goat meat to those parts where the grassland is. So that kind of would be very simplified, the argument.
Thank you very much. The next question is, what is most potential local consumptions ratio? How, in low ratio, how can we pretend wasting food? I'm not sure how it's meant.
Yeah.
Maybe the person could write it again. So another person was asking if what you're thinking about the planetary health diet, if you know that one.
I know it kind of a little bit, but I haven't really worked with that, so I think it wouldn't be very fair to say anything.
All right.
Sorry.
Maybe the person from the question we just talked about would like to ask it again. Otherwise, there is another question. I think it's referring to one of the first questions. It was if you suggest nugging. First menu vegetable or the vegan food as main dish and the meat dish as the side dish.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, meat as the side dish would also be interesting. I was saying that, well, meat as like menu pie or something like that. So just less prominent, or maybe it's you really have to find the way to the queue to the meat dish, whereas it's much easier to queue for vegetarian. I know I'm making this up now, but if you had 2 or 3 counters where you get the vegetarian dish and only one where you get the meat dish, then already the queue is probably shorter for vegetarian. So these things. But I know, I mean, this nudging is, there's also a moral and ethical aspect to it that people have been discussing. So yeah, it's a bit, what is nudging and what is taken over completely. But so patronizing people and so on. But there have been these experiments, and if you put menu 1, because people always choose menu 1 most, apparently, if you do that sustainable, then it works well. But if you show the way on the floor, if you make good signaling to the healthy food, then it you increase it as well. Another easy way, I think it's maybe the easiest and the less ice over it, so to say, is when you just make the portion smaller. You enable like that there's only half a sausage there, and then people will, that reduces food waste, for example, if you make the portion smaller, because people then they can choose, okay, now I'm really hungry, I take the whole sausage, or it's fine, I take half. They have the choice to do that. And they see, oh, I have the choice. That's also nudging in a way. It's, okay.
All right, thank you. Person asked his question or her question again. I was thinking about local consumptions and productions are very different values. Productive food are going wasted, so I want to ask this question, but somebody already asked my question.
Okay, well, we have it, I think.
And by looking at the time, this is our last question. It's sustainable food is often a matter of time and money. Many people can't afford it, but just don't have the time to use fresh ingredients consistently. Do you have a suggestion how we can mitigate that problem?
Yeah, it's really true and difficult, and we must accept that people are in a rush and don't have that time. I mean, one way, if we would think of school meals, for example, you would just provide the healthy, sustainable food to the kids of those families already. So then there would be no need that somebody cooked for them or at home. Other options, making it, I mean, there's a whole discussion, debate on shouldn't organic food be much cheaper to buy in a shop, because organic food already internalizes a lot of the external costs that a food has. So actually, we should have lower costs for that, but that's, I think, not a very easy and simple solution. And then, in a way, I think most people want to feed their family in a healthy way. So again, make it simple for them and provide simple recipes maybe. And I mean, convenience food, pre-prepared food is not always really cheaper than cooking from scratch. But it has, I think the thing is that it has to go quick. Yeah, and this is, yeah, I think this is something where we're not so good at yet in terms of education and sensitizing. It's often kind of an academic approach, and talking to those who are really interested in all that stuff, and that's a very small portion of people. So maybe rethinking how we communicate, and for example, if you want people to enter a solidarity agriculture cooperative, it's a very limited part of society who feels attracted to that, I think.
Well, thank you very much. So these were our questions. And before we end this event, I have a short information to our students, because on Friday from 2 to 4 p.m., there will be a ceremony of the ESD competitions and a lot of workshops. And students have the opportunity to explore different topics together with staff member of the FAU. There are many disciplines, for example, medicine, law, engineering, teaching, or climate science, and some free workshops such as a sustainability festival or public relations. The link to the event is in the chat. And there will also be a lecture next week from Professor Gardiner, who's from the University of Washington. So this is the end of today's lecture. And thank you very much again, Dr. Moschitz, for being here with us and answering all the questions. It was very interesting, and I think we all learned a lot. Thank you.